Chit Chat is sponsored by Fun Again Games, where everyone is welcome at our table, and your source for hard-to-find imports, liquidation games, new releases, and much more. Be sure to visit funagain.com to check it out. On episode 87 of Chit Chat, we sniff out the value of a game and try to figure out what that means to us. Let's face it, sitting down and playing games is almost always fun, but how do they all compare? Welcome back to Chit Chat. This is episode 87, and it might look like it's just the David and Ryan show again, but it is not. We are all here. This is quite the event, and we're all here. Crammed in here. We've got Jeremy down from Milwaukee. We've got Emily here, and of course, Ryan and myself. And we're going to talk about value in gaming today. It's been a topic of discussion lately. I don't know, who else played Descent? You haven't played Descent, right?
I have not played Descent.
Jeremy, have you played it yet?
I've played with the box.
Oh, well, all right.
That's about it.
So that's kind of one of the games that people have talked about a lot in terms of price point versus what you're getting. And then, of course, the topic of conversation in the industry is also things that are happening with prices of cardboard. I heard just last week, cardboard is even hard to get.
Well, cardboard's hard to get. Plastic's hard to get. Shipping is difficult right now.
It's getting a little crazy. So we're going to talk about what value means to us. And it can mean a little bit of different things to different people and for different games. Before we get to any of that and the games we've been playing, we have a winner from last episode.
We do. Congratulations, Andy Sumter. You have won Rift Force. Thank you so much for commenting. Please email us at manversusmeeple@gmail.com.
I feel like there should be like
a great game.
I feel like there should be like a sound.
Rift Force.
Like that little,
you know what?
The cover has that
Rift
energy.
Force.
It
And then
does.
an explosion. And then we come back.
It does. Rift Force does sound like a 1980s action movie where there's a team of people on cool-looking motorcycles in the desert.
No, it is a great game. It doesn't come with any sound effects, but congratulations. And we're giving away another game this week.
Yes, we are. What game?
We're giving away Destinies. That's what we talked about.
We're giving away a copy of Destinies from Lucky Duck. This is just the base game of Destinies.
It is the base game.
But it's enough to get you started for sure, and there's a lot more of that game to get if you like it.
If you win it and you like it, you can still seek out some of the expansion stuff. So it's a good way to try the game.
Exactly. So make comments down below for your chance to win that. And without any further ado, let's talk about value in gaming.
Yeah, I think this is, like you said, a really important topic right now.
Yeah.
I think this season, this holiday season, and even into next year, prices are going to go up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, games are going to get more expensive, whether that's $5 a game or $10 a game. I think we're all going to have to be a little pickier about the games that we buy. So I think it's important to kind of have these conversations.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking, like, what do you value most when it comes down to when you start to make your choices? And I was just, there's just so many factors that go into this thought process.
Right.
Now that you think about it, you guys think, like, I know we are very privileged that we have games sent to us, but it's like I purchase a ton of games. I back a ton of games. And there's a lot of thought process goes into it. And I research a lot about a game when I'm previewing, but even more so when I'm going to buy it. And I think to myself, like, what's the first thing? And I try to predict the longevity of a game.
Sure.
I try. Because I have like a 369 like kind of year rule. Like, will it make it this long?
Wow, this is a lot of detail.
Well, I just kind of project. Like,
it's Excel sheets,
No, it's just something that, like, I mentally go like, hey, will I play this like once or twice in a year, or will this be something that, like, when I get it, I know I would play it for a month straight. Especially big campaign games. Like, that's what I think about, like the long game of this game. And even if it's too much, I may even say, like, that's something I would never get to, so maybe I won't back it. Like, I won't be able to play an 80-hour game. That's
some campaign games might not be able to commit to.
I kind of relate it to video games in a sense. Like, it's like if I see a game that says it has 100+ hours, well, I used to play Skyrim, I used to play The Witcher, I used to play Fallout. I won't buy a game that has that amount anymore. So it's like the board games. It's like when it says 40 hours, I really got to decide if I'm actually going to play through it.
I think that's the deceptive kind of, I don't want to say trap, but you can easily convince yourself with some of these campaign games that are $200-$300. Well, it's $300 for 100 hours of content. But are you going to play 100 hours of content? Or are you paying $300 for a game that you play 4 or 5 hours and then you never visit it again?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I was just having this conversation the other week, and I thought to myself, well, you could buy this game. And then we were talking about Descent in particular.
Yeah.
And I brought up Gloomhaven just as an example. But games like that where you might buy a big campaign game, and if you don't play a lot of it, the value's not there. If you buy this, and it's maybe even more expensive, but you get a little bit more out of it, obviously there's more value there. I think you bring up an interesting point, and a lot of people, when we talk about value, also want to say no, just talk about board games, because don't compare it to movies or anything like that. And I know you didn't bring up video games as a comparison to board games, but when you're looking at video games, and this is kind of how I define or don't define value for myself, is I'll play a 100-hour video game, and I'll play a 10 to 12-hour video game, and I have just as much fun, and I find as much value out of both of those because of the experiences they give me. Even if one gave me a 100-hour experience and something gave me a 12-hour experience, like an Uncharted game or Last of Us, like a highly narrative game that was like, wow, that was like a really long movie that I absolutely enjoyed. Or 100 hours where it's just I'm grinding and having fun doing that. But I don't look at the 100-hour one as, well, that one was more valuable. I mean, I understand how some people can. I just don't look at it that way.
So you're saying you don't factor the amount of time that you're spending with the game isn't your factor. It's
not
the experience
for me.
it gives.
I totally understand why that makes sense for a lot of people, but for me, it's a more abstract notion of what entertainment that I got from it.
Like,
and
what was a memorable experience more?
Yeah,
like?
Absolutely. It's almost like when we've talked about games and just different genres of games and whether we like this or that. I've liked games like, My City, which was kind of a very straightforward, basic game.
And not an expensive game either.
And not an expensive game. That's incredible value when you think of it from that perspective. But when you compare that experience to playing some really heavier Euro or even a heavier campaign game, how do you compare the two? They're kind of apples to oranges. And that's how I look at value, too. I just look at it and go, I really enjoyed my time. Did I spend a lot of money to do it? Yeah, maybe it was kind of expensive. But it doesn't, that doesn't like go, ugh, then now I decided I don't enjoy it anymore because it was too expensive. I don't know. It's kind of like going to an amusement park.
Yeah, I think of it more like what you're talking about too. Sounds like going to a restaurant. Like sometimes you go to a fancy restaurant. You're going to spend more money. But you're like, that's the experience I want to have tonight. It's date night. We dressed up. And like, even if the food isn't top quality, you're still like, it was part of the experience. So sometimes when I'm getting bigger games, I know that like that's the experience I want, right? I'm purposely backing something that's bigger because I want something bigger. Whereas like sometimes you're just craving, fries from McDonald's and you're like, that's okay, it's super cheap, but that's what I want. So it's not like a direct one-to-one of like, it's more what you want right now, and if that is going to bring you that kind of memorable experience like you're talking about. Like
that's a good analogy.
That's what makes it really hard to evaluate some of these games, and I know that we're always put in that position where people ask us, and we've talked about this, is it worth the money? Which is such a hard thing, like that expensive dinner, right?
Remember, I can't tell you what to do with
exactly,
your money.
That's your thing. You say that all the time.
I tell you, I can't
but
tell you.
It's difficult, right? Because everyone that's watching any video that we do, $120 game for somebody that might be their entire monthly budget. For another person, that might be the game they get that week.
And I don't want people charging their credit cards. I don't want people making bad financial decisions.
Everyone has to make that.
But I can't determine what's a good or bad financial decision for you because I'm on this side of the lens, and I also stay out of people's personal lives. But I really want adults to make good adult decisions, and that's why I always implore people, even when they watch our videos, our reviews, good, bad, or ugly, like this part of the research. Like I'm glad that you value our opinion. But I also don't want you to like jump to a purchase just because I love a game or deny yourself.
Absolutely not.
Like
too,
I don't want you to do that.
You touched on this earlier. We are unbelievably privileged when it comes to our situation with board games in particular. Right. Yeah. We get a lot of board games for free. Now, we do buy a lot of board games. I bought Descent. With that said, the fact that we have so many board games that we play, and some we buy, some we don't, all of that playing of those games has an impact on our perspective of value.
Yes.
So I've played some great games that we got sent.
Yeah.
And those were incredibly high value when you think about the price because it was nothing. Descent is going to be different, but I kind of like when I'm sitting at the table, I guess I'm not consumed with how much did I spend of my money for this. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
there. I'm in the moment.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm in
enjoying
it.
it. Like we said, a nice dinner.
Yeah.
Like if you go to a really nice restaurant and you're spending $100 or something for a meal for two, it's not enjoyable if you sit there at the meal thinking
yeah.
oh man, I
Yeah.
spent
Right. $100 for
$100.
this.
You just kind of have to enjoy that steak,
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
you're eating,
Yeah.
and go home and then wait for your credit card bill. It's like, and also like an amusement park. If you go to
Right.
Disney World, one of the greatest experiences on the planet,
I just
right?
got back from there, actually.
Right, for many. But it's not if you constantly look at your charge account.
right.
Like
Right.
you don't want to do that. So what I would say in terms of another thing you said, it's a personal thing. If bending to the will of FOMO
Yeah.
does it for you, go for it.
Yeah, do it.
And if you can afford it,
Great.
sure. But that's a personal choice for each person. I've come to a point where I try to not let that get to me, but I'm still a victim to it.
Well, there's another aspect of the valuation, and it's true that we do get a lot of games for free, but it isn't the money that we're spending that we need to value. It's the time that we have to play these games, too.
Yeah. Time is
And
very valuable. Time is money.
Time is super valuable for us, too, because, we do some sponsored content. We do a lot of paid work for certain games, or we cover Kickstarter games and we need to play these games. We want to play these games, which doesn't always leave time for the new hotness stuff
Right.
that we want to play for fun, right? Like work is work. We
Yeah,
want to play
work
games
is
too,
work.
so that's a super factor. And are you going to spend that much money for a game that you don't have time to play?
Right.
What does your gaming group play? You might love a game,
Sure.
like the heaviest Euro that's going on sale for $100, and it's the best Euro. But if your game group doesn't play Euros, who are you going to play that game with? Are you buying that game just to have it and sit on the shelf? For some people, that aspect of the game, collecting it, is where the value is. Being able to point to it on the shelf and saying, "Yeah, I have this.
Yeah.
It looks good on your shelf."
Yeah, some people
and that is
like
value for some
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, for me, that has been valuable at times. I used to have, statues of Superman and Batman from animated series
Yeah.
around my house. Now they've been in my attic for 6 years.
Are they still valuable in your attic?
On eBay, they are. And that's probably where they'll be going. At a certain point, you kind of have to, obviously you reevaluate what is of value to you
Right.
as time goes on. And, just having experiences and moving on to the next game. And honestly, moving on to the next game is what's valuable to me. I like experiencing
Right.
as many games as possible. Like the longevity thing is nice. It doesn't factor in with me until I take it off the shelf again and play it, and I feel good about owning it,
Right.
however much I spent for it. If I take an old game off the shelf and you know what, let's play Agricola,
Yeah.
and then you play it and you're like, man, I forgot how
I'm
good
glad-
this game
glad I
is.
bought this one.
I'm glad that it's sitting here on my shelf. And then there are times where you play a game and you're like, that is not as good as I remember it.
Yeah.
It's time to call.
Well, Emily, I know it takes a lot for you to buy a game.
It does. Yeah.
So what is that? Is that part of the value equation?
Yeah, well, it's like you were talking about with the board gaming group. Like, who are you going to play it with? And for me, my board gaming group already owns a lot of games, so I don't feel the need to buy the same games that I know I'm going to go to your house and play at your house anyway. But for me, it's usually, am I going to be playing it with my friends or people who come to my house, or especially my family, and they play a lot of lighter games or games that I know don't have as long of a time frame. So for me, it's how many people am I actually going to get to the table to play this? And honestly, I feel like the bar gets pretty low then, because I'm if I think there's a chance I can get my family to play this,
Yeah.
I'm eating it up.
Right.
And it really doesn't usually matter how much it costs, because at that point, to me, it's a sunk cost of if I can just get them to the table and we can have a good experience, I can look back at my shelf and be like, I remember that was a fun time, and it's almost like a memento of
I was gonna say I buy
good
games
experience.
That's a
sometimes
good idea.
just for my son. I want to play this with my son, or I play the game for this experience that I'm anticipating. I know that I'm gonna have I just think of these two things. I buy a game because I want to experience it with my game group. I want to experience it with it. I want to show them that they know the Kickstarter games are coming. They get a chance to see those. They get to see some releases that come up, but there are games that I want to buy specifically just to see them react to these moments.
Yeah.
And I hope that those moments come to fruition when they come. But I was also thinking of, there's a big thing for me with value, and it's something I'm going to try to make sure I mention or even separate in my reviews, is solo experiences matter to me. People know me for doing solo stuff, and that rounds out my purchase. Sometimes I may not be as interested, or I worry about a game being worth the value, but having that one on the box, is a big factor to me because it gives me a shot to give it another look at the game from a different perspective. And that, like we were talking about like Great Western Trail, which we're going to be talking about really soon, but it's like, I need to know, not just as the board game, you have your feelings about the board game, but it's like, I also want to know and feel what that experience is, what it brings, and then I'll decide if it's worth my money. I don't know. I just think that those are things that I evaluate.
That's an interesting point too, because again, to the fact that it means different things to different people. A solo experience on the back of the box won't factor in with me.
And I'm also like solo only. Like solo only purchases, that's something that other solo gamers will say. Like, is this for solo? Like, it'll be like a for solo post. And like, that is a big factor. Whereas like for me, it rounds out my purchases. But like as solo gamers community, they have that in there. I'm only backing Witcher if I see the one player mode,
Yeah.
So there's a, and that's a big community. That's bigger than a lot of people think. And that's why solo modes show up a lot.
Particularly if it's a part of how you define yourself.
Yes.
If you're like, well, this is important to me, and that game does it.
Yeah.
Clearly, that's going to be of higher value to you. One of the things I wanted to talk about, unless anyone else has any more sort of vague concepts about value, I did want to talk about Descent, and I know you guys haven't had a lot of experience with it, but I've had some conversations in some of our comments. We did an unboxing, and there were people in the comments, some of which
all over, and in our Discord, there's comments
all over talking
people
about
asking
the value.
one question, right?
And I think so. The game has been very divisive. There's people who are like, nah, forget it. I don't like what they've done. But I personally believe a lot of that debate has stemmed from the price point.
Yeah.
Like if the thing wasn't as expensive as it is, I think people wouldn't be picking it apart as much as they are. There was one comment in our comments on our unboxing talking about, because we commented in the unboxing about how I really like that big, deep, empty box at the bottom. And I have to admit, hearing this person's perspective makes some sense. They're like, an extra so and so many dollars for half of an empty box. And that's not how I looked at it. And I think obviously that's how they were looking at it. But my perspective was, or it could have been exactly what it is without that empty box.
And no storage.
And still the same price. And it wouldn't have that storage. I looked at the positive of it being that. My hunch is that a lot of these people don't like the price point, and then maybe don't like a lot of things about the game.
Like the Kickstarter version. and then there's another thing, because it's like, well, on Kickstarter, and just taking that product alone, they would say, well, I want the version with no terrain. I want the version that's like the retail, like that one, or I want the one that's not app-based, and I want the whole script in a book. Like people they get an opportunity to do that on Kickstarter, but they don't get an opportunity or a choice in that. So there's a value devalue the cost of an app. Like, how much does an app cost? Well, take that out of it. Like, I don't want that. But I'm thinking like, there's a lot of cost and development into putting in an app. What value do you put on that is up to you. But I know like apps can be a sinkhole for money for a lot lot
Well, it's got to be
deep. When you go that deep, I mean, that is a whole nother level of fun.
I think that's something that we need to take into consideration. I think we do, maybe as industry people, but I see it a lot in the hobby community, is the value of a game is the value of the components. And I think we need to disconnect those things.
Well, I also don't think in the interest of publishers when I'm purchasing. I think I'm aware, but it's like, for me still spending my money, like, apps don't impress me. I have to know how well that, like, I will literally, before I even played, to say, like, I went through the app just to like mess around with stuff, just to see if it was like good or it was like worth it.
But knowing that the game has an app, and honestly, I love it. I think the app is one of the coolest apps for a game I've ever played.
Yeah,
and the way that it can companion with that experience. And I know we've talked about apps before, but the idea of like, okay, sure, maybe printing all of that cardboard and printing all of those minis cost them $20, but the amount of money that went into developing that app, the art assets, the music, the testing, the debugging, the coding, all of that, that's part of the price of the game. And I think this is the hidden cost of any game that people don't think about. When they say, well, why am I paying $30 for a deck of cards? Well, you're not paying $30 for a deck of cards. You're paying $30 for
art,
the artwork, the design. Look at the name of the designer on the box. Is it somebody super huge in the community? They probably had to pay a little more.
Yeah.
Does every card in that deck have a unique piece of artwork?
Is it
like
IP
Fantasy
based?
Realms? Is it an IP?
based?
Is it a Marvel game? I mean, these are all factors that go into the price. And people say, well, if I could that deck of cards costs 15 cents to print.
Sure.
Sure, it does. But they paid $50,000 for the license.
Yeah.
So you have to factor those costs in, and those are, I think, invisible costs for a lot of people that maybe we understand or see a little bit more.
I would like to know your perspective, because it's like we do have a lot of like behind the, you know, like, so what do you think about that? Like even like a purchase, like a deck of cards that's a whole game. Like how do you evaluate that in your mind? Like I just wonder.
You know, it's interesting because I think growing up, there was a point where I asked myself, like some of these board games, especially like growing up playing children's games, I'm like, I could literally make this board game, right? Like I know the rules now. I could actually, like, these components aren't like hard to make. I could just like put pieces of paper around a board. But I think then what I appreciate now is like there is a lot of production value that goes into it. It's like you were saying, like a piece of art, right? Like, yeah, I could draw like my facsimile of like Mozart, sure, but it's not Mozart, right? It's just, it's not the same. And so even when I know the rules and I know how the game is played, I think the experience is very different when you're like paying for that production of the board game. So like, yeah, I could make Parcheesi myself, but like getting a nice deluxe version of Parcheesi is very different. So even if I was playing games that were simple enough where I could create all the components myself, I still wouldn't want to. And so I think that for me, seeing the price, I'm like, I'm more good with that, because I'm like, you know what? It took a lot of work to get here, and I didn't think of these rules myself. I didn't think of how the game was going to get played and how all these mechanics work together. So I'm okay with just being like, thank you for that. Let me enjoy it.
I'm a sucker for production value. I'll admit. You put a game out there and you say $100 for this game, and I'm like, I don't know, that might be a lot. But then you're like $150, but it comes with game trays and these cool, and I'm like, yeah, all in. Like I'll spend that $150.
I like the production, and I think it's interesting. Your restaurant analogy is one I hadn't really thought of. But
Still,
it's really, really well. It's really good because what she just said, you could make Parcheesi, or you could make these things. It's just like making a meal at home,
right?
Or you could go out to a nice meal, sit down, relax, have it served to you, and know that it's being made by professionals. And I think one of the things is we can all relate to that. It's easier for someone to relate to that and make the decision, I'm going to go out and spend money on a nice meal. So they see the difference in value. It's maybe a little harder for people to appreciate that, like what you were saying, with all these costs that you may not really readily think about when a board game is being produced. And I will say this too, and this is not the case across the board, but board game publishers, and we've said this before, no one's, Scrooge McDucking diving into like vats of money.
Especially this year. Most companies are lucky to be staying afloat right now.
Yeah,
even the big ones.
Yeah, and even the big
their
ones.
stuff is literally floating out in the ocean.
Yeah.
Like literally, like, sorry, that's an industry joke. That's almost not funny. It's just like it's straight up on a boat, like waiting to come. Or,
it's tough for everyone, and I don't think anyone is really, when you feel like you might be being price gouged for things. It's really, there's a lot of things going on, and no one is sitting on this golden throne of all their money from selling board games. So just remember that.
I know that when you look at two games on the shelf, two card games or two board games of the same size, and one board game is $20 and one is $50, and you're like, "What? These are the same game. Why is one $20?" Like, and you think, well, they're just this $50 game. They're just getting rich off me. Like they're pulling a fast one. But no, there's reasons that game costs that much.
I would say
you got. And you just got to research it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and I mean, I feel like you know that, right? If we go to Target and you see games on the shelf, and I saw that Catan is way more expensive than, I don't know, make up a name, I'm like, I know why, right? Yeah. Because I know that this is a better game, and I would much rather buy this than buy the less expensive one. So. I mean, I feel like if you've played the games, you know that. It's just hard when you haven't played it yet, and you're kind of still taking that risk, taking that chance of like, should I back this?
You got to decide what value means. Everyone has to decide what value means for them.
Yeah, and also
what attracts you to a game, what makes you spend the money.
I'm going to sound like I'm telling you to get off my lawn here, but I'm just saying, at the end of the day, you don't have to buy anything.
Right.
Like, make this decision for yourself. If you don't want descent because it has a big empty space in the bottom of it to hold the terrain, that's your decision. Maybe you'll have a friend who has it and you get to experience it, and then you realize, oh, actually, this is a lot of fun. I can overlook
Right.
that empty space
I
in
wish
the
I
box.
wish people who followed me on Kickstarter would also have the ability to see that I cancel my pledge Monday night before the next Tuesday. I wish people would like say like it says Jeremy backed. They're like, oh, I saw you back it. I'm like, I wish you could see me canceling pledges
Yeah, after
as
you
well.
do think
like,
about it, do
like
your
Jeremy
research.
canceled this pledge. Why? Oh God, I wish.
Oh,
I mean,
think of all
seriously,
the conversation
Yeah.
in the social media that would happen if people saw
some
that
of the
all
social
the time.
media, like some of the games that I even like, I'm excited to buy, like most anticipated games. I will be in the store, and I'll say like, do I really need to have this game?
Yeah.
You know, like, do I really like? I make sound purchases too. I purchased a lot of games, but but I have to say to myself like, am I really just here to buy?
And I'm going to evaluate this conversation. I think we've talked about value in board games enough.
Yeah.
Let's talk about actual board games. We
Oh.
have had a chance with all four of us here to play some games.
Mm-hmm.
What have we been playing?
Well, yesterday we played Corrosion, and wow, I mean that was
Only once so
we
far.
played it once. It was quite the brain burn, and
that's-
it's quite the brain burn, and we were kind of like working through some of the rules, and that's first place stuff, but definitely something to look forward to. I was impressed with where it's going. It also has a solo mode. Once again, like that brings in more value for me. Like I'm very interested after playing it mechanically, how well it plays. And then there's also some possible things that I'm not necessarily sure I'm jiving with, but it might be better for solo mode. Those are like things that I kind of consider. But I like that. We're coming away with that one.
There's a
That's
lot
really
going
good.
on in that
A lot
game.
going on.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on in that game, and there is, like I said, just one experience, but there's a lot of things happening. And it's easy, at least in our first game, it was easy to overlook some things. That is probably first game jitters.
Yeah.
But there's a fair amount. There's a lot heavier than I thought.
That's
it was
why you
going to
play
be.
games multiple times.
Oh yeah,
because,
I mean the spatial. Not I don't want to say spatial, but the timing thinking of like
Timing.
like that wheel spinning, and you have to think, okay, well where is this piece that I'm buying going to go? How many turns is it going to take to actually trigger? And sometimes you get things that trigger when you don't want them to trigger because you have to plan ahead to such a degree, and it makes you. I've never really played a game that had that idea of like you delayed. Everything is delayed.
Yeah, that
Nothing
really
happens
cool.
the turn that you do it.
No,
Everything is
nothing, and it's delayed in a staggered fashion too. We probably by this point have maybe some content up on the channel about it that goes deeper. But the last Chit Chat we briefly talked about it, but just to give you a little bit of an idea, a little bit more about the game, because there's this wheel. You're going to be playing cards, and as you play those cards, these engineers go to a certain part of that wheel depending on where it's turned. And if the next round you turn your wheel, the cards that you play are going to go to a different position. And then also when you're collecting gears, or some of the gears, those are your resources that you're going to be spending. Those too go in different spaces around that wheel. And then at a certain point when that wheel gets back to a space that has engineers and resources, you go through maintenance, you get those cards back, but you lose those resources.
Yeah.
So figuring out like, okay, I'm going to get these resources. You have control of how often that turns,
Yes.
though.
Yes.
So you don't have to turn the wheel.
right.
But you want to be careful because there's times where you're like, well, I want to turn the wheel for this reason. But I haven't spent there's two medium gears here that I'm just going to lose. And I spent effort to get those doing something. And then you just don't feel efficient in your
Right,
gameplay.
That is definitely an efficiency puzzle.
It is an efficiency puzzle.
Which I stink at.
So do
Which
I.
which is definitely why I want to play solo, so I can definitely get my game on.
Although
so
I have
I'm
to
ready.
say, I thought I wasn't doing
Ready.
well. And
did.
I thought
I
Ryan,
know.
and what, you beat me by what?
5 points.
Beat me by
Wow.
5 points. What, in the 60s, was it? Like 60 something to...
Yeah, it was pretty close.
I think it was
Yeah, I think I was
50
like you were like
something.
69 and I was 74.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It was really close, and
was-
you thought the whole time that I was crushing you because my engine was producing points
All
during the
along.
game,
Oh.
and your engine was building towards in-game scoring.
And I love
Well,
when I feel
let
that.
me correct you. You had an engine,
Okay,
Yeah, he definitely
and
had
I didn't.
He was moving parts. We were like, "What is your
but I
doing?"
wasn't scoring in-game points. I was scoring all my points
No,
during the game.
he was. The thing about playing a game like this with Ryan in particular is you have a sense of understanding these
I
games
like these engine
a
building
lot
games
more
so
quickly
much.
than most, and certainly a lot.
I've played a
more
lot of
quickly than
engine building games.
So what happens a little bit, and it's by no fault of the game, is I sit there kind of feeling a little dumb. You know, you're sitting there next to a guy who's like, oh no, I got this, but on his turn, he's ready to do his next turn, and I'm like, he's getting all these points. I'm looking down thinking, I don't know what I'm doing.
But you still did really well. I mean, 5-point difference.
And then eventually, you start to learn a little bit, and then I kind of identified a few opportunities to make points, and I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. That's all I did. And yeah, it did make a difference. So yeah, I'm interested in playing that again.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested in playing it at 2 players. 4 players is going to be a fair amount.
I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, you love that kind of game for sure.
Yeah. So for me, I want to talk about Great Western Trail. We got to play the 2nd edition, which is something I've been looking forward to a lot because Great Western Trail is one of my favorite games. I mean, I love Great Western Trail. I introduced it to everybody. I'm like, come play Great Western Trail. So this 2nd edition, I didn't quite know exactly what to expect or like what all was going to come with it. They have made some changes that I'm a big fan of. They removed some elements of the original game that may have been a little controversial, like the idea of like trading with the Native Americans for money.
Yeah.
Like that has been taken out and it's replaced with like hunting bandits instead for like reward money, which I think that's a positive change.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And plus like just the game just looks better for the most part. The player boards look better. The
When are you going to talk about the
tracks
hats?
look better.
The hats.
That's what I was going to say. They've got
the
the
hats.
meeples have little hats that they put on the meeples. I think that was your favorite part.
That's my favorite part.
I
by
mean,
far.
it is a cool part. It is a
Totally
cool
worth
part.
it.
The hats.
For-
though.
Talk about
The
value.
hats.
Those little cowboy
Hat
hats.
value.
Hey, whoever at Eggertspiel came up with the hats, ask for a promotion.
Sign that person again.
I will say I this might be an expectation thing. It didn't. The game was not different for the 2nd edition.
No, the game
It
is not.
It is more of a reprint than a like completely revamped 2nd edition.
They added like 2 major things.
They
One we
added-
haven't played yet.
Yep, they added a solo mode,
Right,
and then
haven't
they
played
added a different type of cow module, which we talked about last Chit Chat.
We did mention it a little
We didn't
bit.
know how it was going to work, but now we do, and it's interesting because you can get these cows for cheap, and then they every time you go to
Evolve,
Kansas City, they
yeah.
evolve to a higher value. And I got one on the first turn, and was able to actually level that up throughout the course of the game, which was neat. But if you already own Great Western Trail, I don't know that you like. You know that this is going to be kind of the same game, right?
I
It's
would
definitely
say
a facelift for sure.
It is a 2nd edition.
Right.
This is not a re-implementation. It's not a reboot. It's not a.
I mean, it's some 2nd editions are vastly different. Like
That's
they
true.
factor in some like balancing changes. They might have some expansions or modules that they've incorporated into the game. I mean, I have played some 2nd editions that were just very different versions.
I would just say, like, for me, this one is going to. It will be like having a full on discussion
Yeah, we're
about
gonna
this,
have-
but this is one, and I have a lot of people behind me thinking, for solo, and that's
You need
Yeah.
to play that
that's
solo mode.
seriously
Yeah.
that's what it is. Like to me, that's it. Because I think I think Great Western Trail is a good game, but I got to definitely see if the solo mode is going to convince me to actually own the game, and I do not own the game. I think it's one of the best games I don't own, and I don't know why. I need to play the solo mode to see if I really do care enough about it to purchase it.
I also think you just came up with a great video idea. Best games I don't own.
Yeah, there you
We
go.
should do that sometime.
Love it.
So Emily,
We played Meadow.
yeah,
last
that's
night.
why I was curious
Yeah,
to hear your
yeah.
thoughts on Meadow.
I really liked Meadow. I think that is one that I'm going to purchase because it's like it has very cute artwork. All of it was unique. It felt good playing it. It ran a little bit long, but we were kind of chit-chatting and stuff
A
between.
lot of chit-chatting.
But that is one of the games, like I was saying before, that I just think, can I get my family at a table around this? And I think I could. I really do. It was a lot
It's
of fun.
easy. It's accessible.
It's very accessible, but it still felt fun for me. I think it's always a balance between that because I really enjoy heavier games. So it's like, is it accessible, but also strategic? And I think it was a good match between the two. I felt very rewarded throughout the game. It was very cute and very fun.
Yeah, that's a game too that I think, even though it's a lighter game, not super light though.
Not super.
Yeah, I was
light,
gonna say
It's
it's
not super light.
Yeah, don't be fooled
but
by the
it-
cover on that one.
but-
It's
Yeah.
just beautiful artwork. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I will say it had me thinking a little bit differently at first when we first started playing it, because I thought after the rules, oh, we're all going to build a bunch of these roads, we're all going to do this, and immediately you're like, oh, hey, I can't do a lot. Like
Right. You got to
I'm-
really plan.
I'm not
Yeah.
just dumping a bunch of cards on the table.
Right.
You really have to plan. There's a lot of cards out there, and then this one kept taking the spot that I needed, like because it has a quadropolis sort of mechanic where you're like laying these tiles with numbers on them and going out across that column or row, that number, and taking that card. So as people are playing those tiles, places become impossible to
Yeah.
get. Now, the cool thing is those tiles also have another power on the backside of them, some of which were better than others.
What?
I
Yeah.
think.
Just let you grab a card from anywhere, which
Yeah,
could
but the
kinda
one,
save you
the
from
one
that.
that let you grab any card, and you place those tiles in a completely different location. So I was finding myself holding on to that one most.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I wanted, worst case is like, well, I kind of want that if I need to grab a card and there's nothing that I can't have access
I
to.
never had that one. That one and the one that gave you more roads. I just never.
So
I kept
that-
using those.
That was the one that I thought was the most valuable because you guys were like talking about, I'm like, once you get the roads, you get like 3 and 4 points
Well, yeah,
every
you were
time.
doing-
Yeah,
And I was
yeah,
like,
but they're higher value.
I wasn't getting any cards for roads
Yeah.
much. Like there weren't, at least at first, there weren't a lot coming out.
I think, and that's the game. Like felt so simple at first, and I was like, okay, you get cards, you match icons, sure, and you have to put the card on the card that has that same icon, and then I'm like, okay, but then I start playing the game, and I'm building out my little icons, and the first time I play a card, I'm like, oh, when I play this card, it covers up this icon.
yeah.
Yeah.
So now I don't have that icon.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, wait a minute. Now I have to decide, do I want to lose that icon to get this other card on it that gives me points, which means now I can't play this other card I was planning on playing. And suddenly it just like clicked, and I was like, this is much deeper than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Don't forget the fact that you could spend 2 cards to fulfill one of the resources, but
Yep.
you need cards in the game.
Right.
Right.
I
So
You
ran out
can't
of
just-
cards.
So you do run out of cards, so it's like you don't. That game has more than meets the eye going on there.
For
I
sure.
say that way too much, but it's like it definitely has a lot more than you expect going on. Not like the heaviest game, but definitely more. I think your gaming group would enjoy it more than you think. Don't be fooled by that cover. It's just got absolutely beautiful artwork, like a Wingspan type game where
Yeah.
it's just like absolutely gorgeous artwork. But there's definitely a nice, nice light medium game going on here.
Yeah. So a game I've been playing, and I don't think I've played it with any of you, although we almost played it last night because I
Almost.
brought it. Mandala Stones is a game that I've been playing because I'm going to be doing a review soon. So I got it back out. I played it a while ago, and I played it with my son. I wanted to get some well-rounded experience. I might actually get all of you to the table to try it because
do it.
Yeah,
I
let's
want
do
to
it.
play it at 4 players again. Because I've mostly played it at 2 players, and I do think it's a solid 2-player game. But if you are not familiar with Mandala Stones, this thing, and we have content by this time up on the channel, that review is up. It's in the sort of Azul camp. I think a lot of people look at the box, then they look at the game, and they go, oh, is this like Azul? And I think it's similar. It's a similar category, similar
Scratches
genre.
some of the same itches.
Absolutely scratches some of the same itches, but it does it completely differently than what Azul does. So you're not collecting the tiles in the same way. And I think the biggest thing, and I go into this in the review, is you have choice. On your turn, you're not just, like in Azul, on your turn you take tiles, and everyone takes tiles until they're gone, and then you score. In Mandala Stones, you're taking stones if you want, or you're scoring. So the players around the table are thinking, oh, wait a minute. If I score now, it just opens up a massive amount of strategy that I don't think you see immediately in Azul.
Right. There's that moment in Mandela Stones where you need the board state to change. So you're like, I can't use anything. I'm going to score and let David change the board state.
Yep.
And then David scores and it comes back and you're like, no, I needed the board state to change.
Or the opposite of that, there's times where you can look, especially if you're playing 2 players, and you can see that the other player has to score because at a certain point, if you filled up all these spaces on your player board, you have to score because you can't take more tiles because you have no empty spaces. So then you can think, okay, I'm going to be taking 2 turns in a row.
Right.
So on my first turn, I'm going to set up an awesome second turn. And you can manipulate things and then really think that way, which you don't have as much in Azul. Azul is, and they're both great games, but they're very different experiences. And I'd say sort of the more enthusiast gamer is going to appreciate some of the things that Mandala Stones does.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people
There's
aren't
room
really...
for both.
Yeah, there absolutely is room for both. Definitely watch the review because I talk about that specifically. Anyone else have any other specific games?
I just want to say there's always room for more abstracts in your collection. Backbone of your collection.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Pound for pound. You can get a lot of people to play abstracts more than anything. If you want to introduce people to the hobby, simple rules, definitely enough strategy. Always prioritize those abstracts. Get them in your collection.
You come up with all sorts of great video ideas.
Oh,
We've
wow.
never done an abstract specific video.
I love
I-
abstracts so much.
I do want to mention one more thing,
Okay.
which is that my Grand Austria Hotel Deluxe came in with the Let's Waltz expansion. And we just jumped right into playing that with every single module.
Everything?
We just threw everything in at once. All of the extra cards, all of the different modules, all of it on the table at the same time. Because my gaming group loves Grand Austria. It's to the point where two of the people that play with us know that games. They're like they hunt for cards, they build combos, and they're like, well, if you don't get this card by turn 3, then you do this other strategy instead. And like they know the game inside and out. And so we're like, okay, well, we're comfortable, and
I'm just thinking your game group is like you take your first turn and they're like, oh, you're playing that style. I feel like you guys are that into
that is
it. It's
kind
like,
of it.
oh, it's gonna be this type of game.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah, one turn.
We've played so much Grand Austria Hotel together that you kind of can tell that, and you see these paths through the game that are like, that's the path.
Yeah.
You're going to do this path. But the expansion between the variable player powers, the waltz rooms, the ballrooms.
I've played with the waltz rooms.
That require you to think about closing rooms differently. And then if we use the celebrities, which give you like variable powers for just that turn. All of this stuff, we had people like what we consider really like expert Grand Austria players that were like, oh, now suddenly I have to think about Grand Austria Hotel in a completely different way. And we've got players at our table that never AP who are like sitting there like, oh my gosh, we're like, I don't even know what to do. One of our players, a good friend of ours, Matt, was like, I don't AP in games. He's like, yeah, I have no idea what I want to do right here.
Really?
Yeah, because there was just there's so many options, and they all seem beneficial. And so I think like I love Grand Austria, but it's a medium weight game.
Yeah,
I would say if you play with everything, it like brings that Grand Austria experience up to I feel like a heavy game.
Would you recommend it?
For sure, if you're at that level where you're that comfortable with Grand Austria and you like heavier games, play with everything. Like it was such a neat.
Add all
experience.
the content, all the new content.
We did
crazy.
all of
That's
it.
crazy.
It was awesome.
I would never do that with Anachrony, but I've
No.
done
Well,
it.
Anachrony starts in a heavy game,
All right.
so you add it on the modules.
We could have an entire chit chat about Anachrony, so I'm not going
Hey,
to.
stop with the content ideas already.
I'm not going to.
But if you didn't back Grand Austria Hotel Deluxe, I think you can still get the expansions coming out sometime in retail. So
I didn't, so I probably will.
I love when you play like when it's not just a little bit more, but it actually like changes the way you think about the game.
No, that's the greatest expansion is if
Man.
you can play something and have the experience Matt did where he's like, wow, I have to completely rethink this game.
Right.
And that's also what I think leads to that AP is because you're so familiar with it.
Right.
And you think you're so familiar with it, and you're sitting there, and you're about to eat this meal, and then it tastes completely different than you're expecting. I'm going back to a restaurant now.
Well, it's food tonight.
So anyway, that's all the games we've been playing. We really appreciate you joining with all 4 of us tonight for episode 87. Remember to make a comment below if you want to win Destinies?
Yeah, Destinies.
Destinies. We'll get these games straight one time or another. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then. Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.